Get you ready to do some matrices. Little Rocky Balboa. Good movies, by the way. Okay, so here's our second day of matrices, Unit 13, Day 2. You can see the objectives there. Okay. We need to talk about what's called an identity matrix. An identity matrix is basically, see how the ones go diagonal? Everything else is zeros. So this is, we talked last time about 2 by 2, the dimensions of a matrix, 2 rows, 2 columns, 3 by 3, 3 rows, 3 columns. Okay? This I stands for identity, so we can get that by taking a normal matrix times its inverse, or the reverse. Its inverse times itself. That will give you the identity matrix, this guy here. All right, so example 1, we're not going to go through this whole thing. We did this last video, but basically if we take A times B, matrix A times matrix B, we take this row times this column, this row times this column, this row times this column, this row times this column. You're going to end up with the identity matrix, okay? Now, we could go in reverse. If we take B times A, remember, commutative product doesn't always work. But in this case, you're going to get the same thing, your identity matrix. So that shows that they are inverses of each other. Okay? All right, we have what's called a determinant. This is how we find a determinant of a 2 by 2 matrix. You can see how you have your A, B, C, D. Those are numbers that would be in there. So you take A times D minus B times C. So you see this little DET, that means you're trying to find a determinant. 7 times -9 minus 8 times -5. Okay, so if we clean this up, we end up with -23. So that is your determinant for that particular matrix. So we're going to do the same thing here. Find a determinant. So 4 times 6 minus -3 times 5. So if we clean this up, we get 24 there. This is going to be -15 with that minus, makes it plus 15. So we end up with 39. So that would be your determinant of that particular matrix. All right, how do we find the inverse of a matrix? So this is how you find the inverse of a 2 by 2 matrix. So let's say matrix A, we have some numbers in there, A, B, C, D. To find the inverse, remember that little -1 exponent, that means inverse. You take 1 divided by a determinant times, now look what we do here. We switch the A and D. They switch positions, and then these guys, you do the opposite. Okay? So let's see that in action. So let's find the inverse of matrix M. So it's 1 divided by a determinant, so 2 times 3 minus 4 times 1 times, now we're going to switch the 2 and 3, and then do the opposite of these guys. All right, so 6 minus 4 is 2, so that gives us 1/2. That would be your determinant of that matrix. So now if we take 1/2 times each of those, and you can keep it as a fraction or change a decimal, it doesn't matter, but we're going to multiply all the way through, so that will give us 3/2 there, -2 there, -1/2 here, and 1 there. So that would be your inverse of matrix M, okay? Now, if you were to take this matrix times this matrix, that would give you your identity matrix. So kind of keep that in mind, all right? All right, so let's do the same thing here with matrix N. We want to find the inverse. So 1 over the determinant, 12 times 3 minus 4 times 9. We switch to 12 and 3. and you do the opposite for the other two guys. So 12 times 3 is 36, 4 times 9 is 36. We get 0 down below. Now, can we have 0 in the denominator? No, so that means this guy here has no inverse, okay, which is possible. All right, matrix equation here. This is going to become familiar to you. If we have matrix A times matrix X and it equals matrix B, to get the X by itself, you need to get rid of the A. So you're going to multiply by the inverse of A. And you can see both sides. Now, with matrices, order is important. So it has to be out front on both sides. So that's going to wipe this out, get to the X by itself. So this example 4, there's your matrix A, there's your matrix B. So in order to get the X by itself, you have to take the inverse of A times B. Okay? Now I'm going to do the inverse of A kind of on the side. So here's matrix A. If we want the inverse, we're going to take 1 divided by the determinant. Okay, so 1 divided by determinant, we switch to 9, 11. Do the opposite of those guys. 99 minus 100 is negative 1. So if we multiply by, 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. So basically it's the opposite of all these guys. And that would be your inverse of matrix A. Okay? So if we come back here, we found the inverse of matrix A. Matrix B is 3, negative 7. All right. All right, so if we clean this up, first of all, can we do it? Remember, dimensions are so important. This is a 2 by 2, 2 rows, 2 columns. This is a 2 by 1. So the two inside guys need to be the same, which they are, so we can go ahead and multiply. The outside 2 by 1 is your result. Okay, so if we take this row times this column, we're going to take negative 11 times 3 plus 25 times negative 7. And then take this row times this column, 4 times 3 plus negative 9 times negative 7. And if we clean that up, am I on there? Good. You can take my word for this. Get negative 208 and 75. Now, if we wanted to check this, we take matrix A times this matrix X. That should give us matrix B. Okay, systems of equations, we can do that with matrices. Now in Algebra 1, you probably solve them by graphing, by substitution, by elimination. Here's another way. Now this is just setting it up here on this particular slide. Make sure everything's lined up. You got your X's, your Y's, the 5 and 14, those are your constants. So we get what's called a coefficient matrix, 1, 2, 3, 5. Your variable matrix is vertical, X, Y, and then your constant, okay? All right, so this one we're just setting it up. So get your coefficient matrix. Your variable matrix, and then your constant matrix. Okay, so that's all we're doing on that particular slide, setting it up. Okay. Example 6. Now we're actually going to solve this. All right, so let's go ahead and set it up first. Okay, so there's your coefficient matrix, the variable matrix, and then your constant. So let's label this A, label this B. So if we wanted to solve for x and y, that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're going to take the inverse of A times B. Okay? Now, we're not going to spend the time actually doing this. We found the inverse of one matrix already. So if you take that inverse of this guy times this guy, what will end up happening is you'll get an answer of 7, -5. So what that means is your x is 7, your y is -5. So that would be your solution to that system of equations. Now I'm going to show you a little shortcut here. This is where our friend Ralph, our calculator, comes into handy. What if we had something like this? Okay, so let's first set it up. So there's your coefficient matrix. We got our x, y, z, the variable matrix, and then your constant matrix. Okay, so remember, this is matrix A, matrix B. So in order to find this, we need to do the inverse of A times B. Okay, so here is how we're going to do such a thing. Our friend Ralph comes into play. So we got to turn it on here. Let's keep it like that. Okay, so here's how we do matrices in our calculator. First of all, in blue lettering above the x to the -1 button, it says matrix. So if I have to get there, I have to hit the blue button and then that button. That gets us to the matrix screen. We're going to arrow to the right under edit. Well, let me go back real quick. There's your determinant and some other things. Okay, but we want to go over to edit, so we're going to edit matrix A. So I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to put this matrix in. It is a 3 by 3, so we're just typing it in. Okay, make sure you hit enter after each one, and then just scan over it and make sure it's exactly what you need it to be. So there's matrix A. Now I'm going to hit second quit to get out of there. Let's go back to matrix, second matrix. Let's go edit, this time matrix B. Now this is a 3 by 1 matrix. Make sure you use the negative button, not the minus button. So there's matrix B. Okay, now we determined already we have to do the inverse of A times B. We have our matrix A, matrix B already in our calculator. So let's go to matrix. We're going to choose matrix A. I want the inverse. Get that little -1 button. Times, go back to the matrix, matrix B. There's your answer. 9, -12, -7. So that's how you do matrices on the calculator. Now you could do that with anything now. You can find the determinant of that there. You can find the inverse of a matrix. But it's always very helpful to know actually how to do it without the calculator, right? Okay, so that concludes Unit 13, Day 2. Here's our question of the day. When you have me, you immediately feel like sharing me. But if you do share me, you do not have me. What are we talking about there? Okay, so there's Unit 13, Day 2. Go Cougars!